Tonight, we round up the key events in Nigeria and beyond over the last 7 days as we look back at the week that was, and what a week. From the death of the hugely popular and enormously respected Ijaw political leader, Chief Edwin Clark, at the age of 97, to the passing a few days earlier of another principled voice of political activism, the detribalized Afenifere leader, Chief Adebanjo, at the age of 96. From the much-hyped rebasing of Nigeria's price index for the first time in more than a decade, which, according to the statistics agency, brought the inflation rate down to less than 25%, to the Nigerian Senate summoning key security chiefs to appear before it over the allegation by the American Congressman Scott Perry that U.S. aid had indirectly funded terrorist activities in Nigeria. And to round off the week in Nigeria, the glittering launch of former military president Ibrahim Babangida's much-anticipated autobiography, 32 years after he left office, and his admission that he made many mistakes during that crucial period in the evolution of this country. And on the international scene, after a rare moment of hope in Gaza, with the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas appearing to hold against all odds, that world appears to be on the verge of shattering again. Well, tonight, as we look back at the week that was, we have informed assessments making sense of Nigeria's and the world's most profound political developments, analyzed with clarity by our guest commentators. I'm Charles Enyegolu, and this is Arise Primetime. Well, let's dive right into it, because it was with deep remorse that Nigerians mourned the passing of the Ijaw political leader, Chief Edwin Clark, who died earlier this week at the age of 97. He was, to use a cliche, a larger-than-life character who, as a lawyer, politician, presidential advisor, senator, and former federal commissioner for information, made some of the biggest contributions to the Niger Delta in particular, and to modern Nigeria in general. With his very large personality, he stood in the way of oil exploration that was carving itself into the landscape of the Niger Delta, turning it into a scene of massive environmental destruction. His cry became a rallying call for environmentalists and politicians from all over the region and beyond, as he demanded justice for the victims. Well, with me tonight to remember Chief Clark, as well as to give us their perspectives on all the other developments in the past week in Nigeria and beyond, our guest commentators, the public policy analyst and development expert, Okereke, who is in our overflow studio, the legislative consultant and public policy analyst, Chibuzo Okereke, and Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Times, or Daily Trust rather, newspaper, Mahmood Jega. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being here. Let me start with you, Mahmood. You knew Chief Clark. Somebody said that he was a giant who deserves an entire movie in itself. I mean, just tell us more about what you know about him.
Thank you very much, Okereke. I don't think it's entirely correct to say I knew Chief Clark, because I never met him during his lifetime, although I have known him as a public figure and by reputation since the Gawan era, when he was a federal commissioner, I think, for information. After the overthrow of the Gawan regime, there were some negative stories about him during all those polls. But subsequently, he became a very towering figure in the country, as you said in the intro, with respect to the agitation against the spoliation of the oil-producing areas. But especially during the Jonathan presidency, when he became he loomed large on the scene as the Ijaw leader and like the kind of political godfather of the then president. And even after that, In many ways, he was the leader of the alliances of South-South political groups. So he was a giant figure on the Nigerian political scene, and the death of such a person is a huge loss to the country. I don't know whether he wrote any book, because again, it's like what Sheikh Anta Diop said, that when an elder dies in Africa, it's like a $10 million library has been set on fire, because he has gone with so much information. If he didn't document it in book form, maybe he wrote a book, but I'm not aware of that. So that's why there is so much outpouring of grief at his passing.
Indeed, but of course his younger brother, Chibuzo Okereke, I mean, not Chibuzo Okereke, his younger brother, but his younger brother, J.P. Clark, but I'm asking Chibuzo Okereke the question. His younger brother was the renowned Nigerian poet, J.P. Clark, who was a brilliant author. So he documented a lot of bits and snippets of their lives sort of growing up. So even if Edwin Clark didn't do it himself, his brother did. But I think a lot of people remember Mr. Clark for his, as Mahmoud Jega said, tremendous contributions to this country. What do you think he actually stood for? What do you think were his core beliefs?
Well, I think that a few years back I attended his, I think, 80th birthday or so, and at Abuja Continental at the time, there was Sheraton. And I think a book was launched at the time. I wouldn't know if it's the autobiography or just an account. About 2 to 3 books, if I remember correctly. And I think, like Mr. Mahmoud said, he's a man that found his voice. And one thing that is critical in life is to find your voice and use it for national good. He became a towering figure, a leader in the Niger Delta, the voice that was so loud that when President Jonathan was facing a challenge, when he was vice president, was one of those voices that we hear on a daily basis, calling for the right thing to be done. And eventually, the doctrine of necessity was applied for President Jonathan to emerge as acting president. Also, in the just concluded election, you could see that he stood his ground, saying that the national government must be run in an equitable manner, that power should be devolved around. In fact, he was particularly talking about Southeast being given a shot at the presidency. So such a figure was not afraid at the time we knew him about his benefit or stomach. I think he realized that he needed to play a critical role to shape national unity, national progress, and the president acknowledged that much in his tribute. So for standing tall to say, in this time, we should make sure that Southeast produce the president. And he went on to publicly even working with the North Central people to endorse candidate they believe is the right for Nigeria.
Let me come to you, Abakaka, who is in our off-site studio. Okay, I'm told he is not quite ready. I think they're still fiddling with the knobs there to try and see if they can establish his comms. But let me come back to you then, Mahmoud Jega. He believed that the Niger Delta and other regions of Nigeria should control their own resources and pay taxes to the federal government. So a believer in restructuring.
Well, that was the controversial aspect. Very popular agitation in the Niger Delta region, but was resistance from other parts of the country, because since oil is the principal revenue earner in the Nigerian Federation right now, nobody is sure how exactly it will work out if you allow regions or states to collect revenue from mineral resources and pay a part of it to the federation. You know, on paper it is the ideal thing to do, but possibly the worry is about what will happen in practice if you do that. But the agitation has been made consistently in the last nearly 30 years, especially at the beginning of this republic, when there was a lot of talk about resource control. It achieved some results, like the increase in the percentage devoted to derivation in the sharing of the federation account, but it didn't achieve the full aim, which was, as you said, to devolve the power to states, regions to collect the revenue and pay a part. But it's an ongoing national discussion.
Indeed. And we're still trying to establish communications in our off-site studio with Abba Kaka. As soon as we do, we'll bring him in. But let me move away from Chief Clerk, because just a few days before he died, Nigerians mourned with unrestrained affection another principled voice of political activism, Chief Adebanjo, who shed these mortal coils at the age of 96. Chief Adebanjo stood as arguably one of the most detribalized Nigerian politicians, using his position as the leader of the pan-Yoruba group Afenifere. He preached unity, fairness, power sharing, respect and equality, working tirelessly to build a bridge between the southwest, the southeast and the north, pushing for the kind of power rotation that he believed would foster inclusiveness. And of course, Chibuzo Okereke, you were talking about the same thing just a minute ago about Chief Edwin Clark, and here we also have another very well-respected, utterly detribalized Nigerian, Ayo Adebanjo, who stood for the same thing, irrespective of the ambitions of his own part of the country or ethnic group, or the fact that he had a prominent member of that group running to be president. He was quite happy, in the interest of equity, to put his support in another part of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, your foundation is very important. And that is even what we talk about today. Pa Adebanjo was a mentee of His Excellency late Nnamdi Azikiwe. He was a member of the Zikist movement, and that shaped his philosophy and nationalism. And he carried it through to 97 years. He was a member of the Awoism movement, who believed in education, and he fought for that, pushing for education, rural development, and healthcare. As an active member of the AG, he faced a lot of challenges, including the treasonable felony charge against him, I think in 1962 or thereabout, and then went on exile. And all the challenges he faced, he still retained that voice of nationalism, that voice of equity, and the president described him as a nationalist who believed in the progress of the country. There could not be a better tribute than that, especially when in the 2023 election he stood against the president. In fact, he called that everybody who care should vote for Mr. P2B on the ground that he's a good candidate and for equity, that he comes from the Southeast. Maintaining that kind of stand in a very politically charged environment shows you he's a man of integrity, he's fearless, and he believes in those foundational principles of the Zikist movement here.
Right, and Mahmoud Jega, I don't know if you met him. I met him. I mean, I met him a number of times. He was actually a guest on this program, and the one before it, which was the Arise interview. There seemed to be this aura every time I saw him radiating from him and around him that suggests that he was put in this country to make it better. And I've heard it said that he woke up every day determined to make Nigeria a better place.
Well, I again never met Chief Adebanjo, but I remember him especially during the Oputa panel in 2001. He was the spokesperson of the Afenifere group there. And he was a very powerful orator, spoke very well, eloquently, with a lot of humor and all that. And again, he also was a towering figure of the Nigerian political scene. But the use of one phrase that you used in the introduction when you said detribalized. Sometimes I don't know whether that squares with leading a regional organization, because you see the problem, one of the problems I see in this republic was the prominence of ethno-regional organizations, of which Afenifere was the original one, the Ohanese and the Arewa Consultative Forum and the Niger Delta group. We didn't have any such, and the Middle Belt group, we didn't have any such groups in the Second Republic, for example. And these groups have really thrown some kind of K-leg into the democratic process, because ideally all politics in the country should be through political parties, which are the agents recognized by the Constitution, you know, to field candidates for election. But either because of the weakness of political parties in this republic, or because of the prominence of these ethno-religious groups, helped to weaken the political parties. In the long run, I don't think it is a good contribution to national cohesion and democratic practice to have such extremely visible and powerful ethno-regional organizations. That's my own
that's perfectly fine. I think what they tried to do, I mean, I think it would be unfair to say that they don't have the capacity to be detribalized. I mean, because clearly Adebanjo was, and he was a prominent member. In fact, he led the Afenifere group, but he was also quite happy to reach out across the regions and support political candidates from other parts of the country. I mean, as far as he was concerned, because he was a Afenifere and because it was a Yoruba organization, didn't mean that he should limit himself to that part of the world. I mean, part of what the group stood for was unity, to try and unify this country as much as possible. But we've got to move on because we haven't got that much time. And I want to go to the next topic, because this week, after a much hyped rebasing of Nigeria's price index for the first time in more than a decade, the annual inflation rate in Nigeria stood at 24.48%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. Well, last month, before the rebasing, the NBS put Nigeria's inflation rate at 34.80% year on year. So how did ordinary Nigerians interpret this latest data? Were they optimistic that it appears to reflect a sharp slowdown in inflation, even though prices have clearly not come down to the new rate? And if not, how significant is it that this rebasing appears to have made such a big difference to the headline inflation rate? And let me come to you, Chibuzo Okereke. If we could try and keep the answers as short as possible, because we need to take a break in about 2.5 minutes or so. I mean, how did you interpret those figures? A lot of Nigerians were struggling to figure out whether it made sense or not. I mean, going from 34-point-something% inflation, and suddenly we're told it's 24-point-something%.
Well, I think that the managers of the economy now exporting their philosophies to the National Bureau of Statistics. If you remember, a few months back, about a year or so, we had the NBS also came and changed the methodology for unemployment basis in Nigeria. And then unemployment figures dropped on paper, but unemployment kept rising, you know, as the lived experiences of Nigerians. Now, many of them in that cycle believed that, rebasing to 2024 was the right thing to do, and then it could have impact on the inflation figure. But as that now solved the the symptoms of the inflation? The answer is no.
Well, I mean,
we still have high price index, so methodology is not the issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think they were saying that it was the issue, and that's an important thing to point out. And let me come to you, Mahmoud Jega, for the last word before we go on a break, because essentially they were saying that rebasing, what happened was the rebasing of the consumer price index, not the overall economy. And therefore, that was necessary because it was a statistical realignment of consumption patterns, and what we now have matches international standards. I mean, I wonder how that came across to you.
Okay, it came through to me as big grammar. Because the important thing...
Well, believe me, it came that way to me as well.
Because as Oga Chubozo said, the important thing is that the prices in the market are still very high and probably still rising. So when you say that because of rebasing, the inflation rate has dropped by a whopping 10% overnight, people are about to be cynical and say, well, maybe you are just saying this in order for government to feel good. The important thing is let's do something to check the inflation rate. That's the important thing, not big grammar around consumer price index.
To be fair, I don't think anybody was convinced, because clearly if you go to the market, I mean, it didn't make any difference to the prices in the market, so that's that. But let's take a break and we will return. You're watching Arise Primetime, plenty more still ahead as we continue our assessment of the week that was here in Nigeria and beyond. And don't be surprised if one of our commentators in the studio has to leave, because we need to bring Okereke in so that he's not marooned out there. We can only take 2 people in here. See you in a minute.